Good evening and welcome everybody to the first in our series of these Tea Time Talks. The whole aim of these Tea Time Talks is that we've got a 30-minute window to discuss different subjects around the beef production. Now, this first one, we're talking about sucklers and the role of sucklers in the beef enterprise. The next one we've then got is on the 25th of November, 1 week's time, when we're going to be discussing carbon. We'll be discussing with Jimmy Hislop and Steve Ross from Alltech, talking about how to improve the efficiency of your suckler herd and the reduction in carbon. We've got one on the 2nd of December where we're talking about data, collection of data, what you can do with data, and what can it mean to help improve your business. We'll be discussing that with one of our multipliers and AgriWeb. On the 10th of December, we're going to be discussing genomics, when we're going to have Lee Leachman back, and we will have Zoetis as well. Talk about the exciting things that's happening in genomics within the stabilisers, and then the bigger picture for the UK beef industry. And then we're finishing this series off on the 16th of December, where we're looking at EBVs. We've got two of our multipliers in, talking about how they use EBVs and the management decisions that they make working around that. So those are the rest of the webinars. But this evening, we're going to be talking about suckler production. So let me just very briefly explain how it's going to work. We're going to, if anybody's got any questions at any time, now down the bottom, if you're on a PC, it'll have a Q&A, but if you're on a phone or on an iPad, it's going to be at one of the sides up near the top. There's a Q&A button. So if anybody's got any questions at any time, just type that question in and it will pop up. Now, we've got Ursula. Give us a wave, Ursula.
Right.
Anybody that's dealt with Stabiliser cattle in the past will know Ursula. Ursula's going to be popping up and down when questions come in. So if we see Ursula, it means there's a question to be asked. Now, let's kick things off. Let's do some very brief introductions. I'm very pleased to be welcoming two fantastic guests on this evening. First up, we've got Lee Leachman. Lee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Lee Leachman. I live outside of Fort Collins, Colorado in the U.S., and I think I've been breeding stabilizers longer than anyone since we started officially calling them stabilizers in 1988. And I suppose the breeding program dates back to the early 1970s when my father first started crossbreeding on our ranch in Montana. So we're excited to be here and excited to see so many of you UK breeders interested in stabilizer genetics.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lee. And also joining us this evening, we've got one of our multipliers. We've got Richard Baker. Please introduce yourself, Richard.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Richard Baker. I farm beef and sheep in Derbyshire and have been a multiplier now for a number of years, and very pleased to speak to you all tonight.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very pleased that you can both join us. For me, my name is Seth Wareing. I'm the business manager here at the Stabiliser Cattle Company. I've been involved in many different aspects of beef production throughout my career, and I'm delighted to be working alongside such fantastic people, fantastic breeders, and really looking forward to getting into this discussion this evening on suckler cows. So, you know, we're all here at the moment to discuss the role of suckler cows. And let me ask you a question, Lee, first up. In your role over in the States, how did you decide on the stabilizer as the breed to be going with?
Yeah, great question, Seth. So we did quite a bit of research that really stemmed from Clay Center, Nebraska, which is a USDA center in central Nebraska, where they had been studying several different composite combinations. They built one that was 3/4 British and 1/4 Euro. They built the basically what was a stabilizer that was half and half, and they'd also constructed one that was 3/4 Euro and 1/4 British. And from their data, they came out with several sort of conclusions. One of the conclusions that they came up with was that the stabilizer mix maintained its body condition roughly equivalent to an F1 Hereford Angus cross female, and that black baldy female was really sort of the cornerstone of beef cattle production in the US in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so the idea of recreating something that performed like that was very interesting. And of course, Clay Center had done an enormous body of work starting in 1973 and actually wrapping up in about 1995 to characterize the benefits of hybrid vigor and retained heterosis in ranching. And we had also seen those same benefits in our own operation, where we had made F1 Simmental Angus, F1 Gelbvieh Angus, F1 South Devon Solaires. And we loved those hybrids. And then we actually bred up to purebreds from those. And the farther we bred up, the less we liked the way the cattle performed. And so we went to Clay Center in the late 1980s and read what they had discerned from their study, and it explained what we were seeing in the cattle. And we thought, well, this idea of raising a composite should work. And we had just done a little bit of consulting with King Ranch in Texas, and they had adopted a composite design that we developed for them. And so off we went with two different composite lines originally. The Stabiliser that started out as a quarter each of Hereford Angus, Simmental, and Gelbvieh. And we had a second line that we called a range maker, and that had Simmental and Solaire and Tarentaise and Angus. And eventually we dropped the range maker to just amplify the population of the Stabiliser. Of course, it wasn't too long after that we encountered the likes of Richard Fuller and Robert Rook and a few other tag-alongs, and off we started on a wild adventure to introduce the Stabilisers into the UK.
Fantastic. So, I mean, look, you mentioned a number of things there, Lee, but the ones that stood out for me, you mentioned two words: heterosis and hybrid vigor. You know, could you just touch on what that means in the cattle breeding situation?
Yeah, in the very basic sense, if you had on your farm two different herds of purebreds, let's just say for a minute that they were Limousines and Angus. So you have two different herds, and you said, how much beef per hectare am I producing with the Angus? How much beef per hectare am I producing with the Limousine? If you created a third group, which were half-blood Simmental and Angus, the difference in performance of those half-bloods compared to the average of the purebreds, that's hybrid vigor. And that hybrid vigor, so we say it's the increase in production over the average of the purebred parents, okay? And on pounds weaned per cow exposed, which of course is a big driver for suckler herds, how many pounds do you produce per cows you put with the bull the previous year? The hybrids have about a 23% advantage, which is enormous.
Which is huge. Yeah, so it's getting more from, it's more than the sum of the parts. So by using a composite breed or a hybrid animal, we're getting more than if we were using two pedigree animals.
And that's because of the heterosis of the genes, because we've mixed it up. What some people say is we've removed inbreeding suppression of performance. So as we inbreed populations, they get more fixed, but they're less let's say resilient, right? We know that a purebred dog is going to usually expire at a much earlier age than is the mutt that we got, right? Because the mutt's a cross and it lives maybe sometimes as much as twice as long, and that's hybrid vigor.
Right, fantastic, brilliant, good. So Richard, let's just bring you in there. Do you want to just explain briefly what you do and just touch on some of your cows?
Yeah, well. I farm and build as well, and so a big thing for me is cows that can look after themselves. So starting number one with calving ease, I rarely ever have to touch an animal to carve it. They carve all outside in the middle of a field, so we don't have calving gates to really in sheds, so everything has to do the job. And then we take everything right through to finish. Yeah, basically.
No, fantastic. So the big driver for you, because farming's not your main business, is it, Richard?
No. Like I say, I've got building as well, which is generally 5 days a week. So that takes up a lot of time.
Yeah, but so you needed a cow that doesn't need a lot of looking after, that doesn't need a lot of input and a lot of care, but you obviously wanted to make a profitable animal at the same time. Would that be right?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is the ability to do everything from grass and forage. My animals, we're 1,000-foot elevation here, and they all out winter, and they do really well on it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good because I think I've spent a lot of time going through the industry, talking to a lot of farmers as well as talking through other people, and I think as a rule, I think we generally say that actually we've perhaps kind of almost bred ourselves into a corner when we wanted bigger and bigger animals, and as we bred for bigger and bigger animals, we got that goal in the end of getting a bigger carcass. However, that led on to a lot of problems associated around that calving. And as you rightly highlighted, Richard, that that calving ease is a big thing. To maximise the output for me, for any suckle operation, it's about selling animals, and to do that, you've got to have a live animal at weaning to be sold. So if there's problems at calving, obviously, that then limits those number of animals. Are there any other the traits or features, Richard, that you would focus on when selecting animals to be part of your suckler outfit?
I think we focus on an awful lot of things, but well, one would be the one calf every year. Fertility is very important. That's a main driver, I would say. The other thing is the amount of calves per cow, per herd, basically. We can get 96 to over 100% calves per animals put to the bull. The over 100% is due to quite a few twins. So when we lose very few, I think that's a major driver, actually having a lot of animals to sell from the same amount of cows. So.
Yeah, I'm assuming, Lee, in the States, everything there's no subsidies going on in the States, and every cow has to stand up and earn her place on the farm, and you'd be seeing similar things over there.
Yeah, we would. I mean, fertility is a major driver. I just spent a hour, well, actually several hours on a Zoom call this morning with one of our customers up in central Montana, and they know their unit cost of production, and one of their big drivers is live calves marketed per cow on inventory, and that's a big driver, and they use Stabiliser females to try to maximize that percentage.
Yeah, absolutely. That, and I think that's one of the big areas that we've perhaps forgotten here in the UK is making sure that we have that live animal to sell. So there's a number of reasons why that can happen. As you said, is either problems around calving or it's that fertility of the animal in itself. For me, working with a suckler animal should be nice and simple. You shouldn't have to go and stay awake for 9 weeks while you're calving the herd. You should be able to check them in the morning, check them before you go to bed, and then if there's any calvings in the middle of the night, you're down. That calf is up and suckling. So having a cow that can calve herself, and that calf is up and suckling is going to be a big one, isn't it?
And I think that, one of the things that we lose sight of here and there is that if we broadly divided the traits on a set of cows into traits that drive suckler productivity or traits that drive finishing productivity, there's a very antagonistic relationship between those two. Now, it's very easy to measure the terminal traits. Okay, it's very easy to look at muscle shape and growth rate and hot carcass weight and fat thickness. Those traits are highly heritable. They're easy to change. You can select for them. You can make indexes that move them and improve them. What we probably didn't understand 20 or 30 years ago when we all started radically improving those terminal traits is that we were going to have a huge adverse effect on the maternal suckler traits. And so almost without exception in populations around the world, this is something we now have to pay attention to and say that what we really want to do is we want to balance those suckler traits with those finishing traits. And it turns out that those suckler traits if you're talking about, you know, a difference between what Richard experiences near 100% calf crop versus a more typical crop that could easily dip down into the 70s or low 80s, it's very hard to make up that difference on those terminal traits. And so what we've done is we've tried to design animals that are going to balance that maternal and terminal better than the animals that are selected just with those terminal indexes.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And you know, I think that's a really key part, isn't it? It's how do you select cows, and what, you know, what drivers do you need to focus on if you're any commercial breeder, no matter where you are in the world? What are those drivers that perhaps you need to focus on, and what numbers do we need to look at?
Is that for me or for Richard first, Seth?
Go on, Richard. Yeah.
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 Numbers wise, I think, like you say, we need a calf per cow every year. That's the main, the first thing. And after that, growth. We do need that growth there. We need animals that will. For me, a personal target is animals finished off grass by the end of summer to avoid a second winter, and that's a big profit driver for me. Only wintering weaned calves, and then finishing off grass the next summer as cheaply as possible.
So you're finishing everything on the farm, are you, Richard?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and they all get sold fat. What sort of weights and grades do you normally get?
With heifers, we can get up to, we're around the 5. We don't go too big. We'll be 550 to 600 kilo live weight. And we'll be getting ours R4Ls generally on them. We have previously finished entire bulls at around the 13-14 month age, and they do fantastic. They'll get into the U's, U3L, U4L sometimes as well, at up to 400 kilo carcass weights, between 360, 400. The only reason we don't do that anymore is we're not in a predominantly grain area. And grain is rather expensive, and we can grow good grass, and that works better for my system. So
absolutely, and you know, that leads on to one of our next topic, which we'll be doing next week, is the carbon efficiency, and we'll be discussing that more in detail then. But Lee, you know, again, if you're a commercial guy, what sort of numbers should I be looking at?
Well, I think on most ranches that we look at, we've got a fixed land opportunity. We might be able to increase that with lease, but we've got so many hectares. And I think the math that people probably don't do, but should do, is kilograms produced per hectare. Because really that's what's going to drive our bottom line. I mean, price per kilogram matters as well, but kilograms per hectare is a major driver of the efficiency of your suckler herd. And so that comes down to how many cows can you stock on that farm and still maintain good reproduction levels. We look at fixed cost and variable cost, and the variable cost of running a couple more cows typically is only a fraction of your total cost. So if you can stock a few more cows on the same land, your profitability oftentimes will go up substantially. Our figures are that if we can run 10% more cows on the same land and keep our production levels, then our profitability typically doubles.
Well, that's massive. And you know, I know when we obviously look at similar numbers over here in the UK, and what we see would be similar in that actually, if you get better fertility, you run more cows on the same land, and you get the performance coming through, that difference to an average farmer can be up to £340. You know, so that's a difference between making money and not making money on a suckler enterprise. Right, Ursula, you've popped up. It must mean we've got a few questions.
Great. Yes, I do have a question. Can you hear me? I have a question from Will Tompkinson. And he's basically asking what makes a stabilizer breed. It's not actually, in a way, it's linked to what we're talking about, but it's not actually about suckler cows as such. He's asking, what makes a stabiliser cattle breed so much more different to farmers to rearing dairy bred cows, which would mean being able to run more calves rather than cows to the acre, and a bigger turnover of cattle? So basically, the stabiliser breed as a dairy bred calf, what more advantages and how much quicker could they be done off grass, I think is the question.
Right. Well, look, I mean, obviously in the UK, we're seeing a massive push now to dairy bred, and we're seeing that a lot of the dairy cows are now getting bred to sex semen to produce a replacement, and the rest are going to beef, which is a a great opportunity for the stabiliser. So, we know that the stabiliser performs really well, and it works really well with the dairy cow. We would get to the market specification in the right time, and we would do it with good feed efficiency. Lee, have you got any experience of dairy bred beef in the US?
Yeah, I do, but Will might have been getting at a slightly different angle. But what we see on the dairy bred, obviously grass finishing dairy calves is a different animal than grain finishing dairy calves. We think that the stabilizers crossed on the dairy animals are going to be particularly apt at making those animals more suitable for grass finishing. But I think at the end of the day, what we've got to look at, I think Will's question kind of got to more of the question of why a stabilizer cow calf versus a finishing operation with dairy calves. And I think that I would say to someone, you have to look at your operation and say, is your operation better suited for finishing, or is it better suited for suckler? And if you're going to do either of those, right, whether you're going to finish or do suckler herd, you've got to say, am I able to do that better than the average producer is able to do that? And I know, Richard, you looked at this, you went through some of these same advantages. You ended up on the suckler herd side. Do you want to speak to that? Because it kind of might be right down your alley.
Yeah, I previously had the dairy cross suckler herd, and they weren't really working out for me, especially with calving and things like that. So I was originally going to go into doing exactly what Will's on about, buying dairy calves, rearing them and finishing as a fairly simple system. But I think I chose the stabilizers and suckler production mainly because of the pride in being able to have your own animals rather than just buying what you can buy in the market. And I think the thing you can't do when you go and get calves is you don't know all its parentage, you don't know how good they are, and you haven't got the ability to improve. If you're the other thing is, like, if you're a flying herd as well, you're always relying on the other person's breeding, and you can't have that influence yourself. You can't pick your best animals because you don't know what the best animals are in the other person's herd. And I think them small gains that you can keep breeding every year make a massive difference to your profit.
Yeah. Oh, good. Alicia, we got any more questions that you want to ask at the moment?
Well, another one's just popped up actually as we're talking about dairy calves. Yes, Harry Garside, do you see the increased supply of beef calves from the dairy herd a threat to the UK suckler enterprise?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Yeah, no, that's look, I think what we have is we've got a beef industry that is relying more heavily on dairy bred animals now. Now, what we do in the suckler industry is quite different to what the boys in the dairy beef industry do. We take that grassland that makes the UK fantastic. We've got some wonderful countryside, but we've got a lot of it that we can't do anything else with. That need cattle on it, that need sheep on it and they convert that average to poor quality grazing that we can't get in and plow anything else up with. They convert that into a quality protein. Now, there's always going to be a role for suckler beef within the beef industry, but it's making sure that actually when we do have the sucklers, it's the same as anything. When we've got any enterprise, we're as efficient as possible as doing it. And if we can make exactly, coming back to Lee's point, if we can make more money off that same space, then we're all going to be winners.
Yep. We get the same question in the United States. We're having the same phenomena with lots of sex semen being used in the dairies, and then the balance or half of those dairy cows being bred to beef. But what we have to remember is that before sex semen, those dairy cows, half of those dairy cows were producing a male dairy calf, and that calf was already in our beef production. So certainly these beef cross dairies are more efficient. They're going to be more productive than those dairy cross dairies males were. But I think it's actually going to end up being a fairly small change in the total number of calves. We're just going to see them differently because instead of black and white male calves, we're going to have these beef cross dairy calves. And I think the other thing we have to remember is that these dairy cows are every year getting more productive. And as a consequence, the number of them tends to decrease. And so over time, I actually am not worried about that going into the beef supply chain. I don't think it's going to have a big enough impact because, again, they were already producing those male dairy calves.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, time flies when you're having fun. We've literally got about 3 minutes left. So just a few quick questions I've got for you. Let's go to Richard. Would you use terminal sire on your stabilizers?
No.
And Lee?
Well, that was quick because that's Richard. I thought you were going to elaborate. I would say that depends. If I could secure a good supply, if I went to Richard and Richard said to me, if he was my neighbor and he would sell me a set of stabilizer heifers every year, and I could buy them consistently and dependably, and he ran them similar to how I was running them, then I would absolutely terminal cross them because I'll get a lift from doing that. But it really requires that I have a secure and dependable supply.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, for anybody that's wanting to look, where should they find more information?
Ursula, that's for you.
Yeah, you just popped up, Ursula. Well, look.
I got another question to add to Lee's the talk in there. And it was, if I use a stabilizer cow, what is the most functional terminal sire?
Boy, that really depends on your market. I mean, obviously, you can go for maximum weight, which to me would probably be with a Charolais cross. I'm sorry, I disappointed all the limousine breeders out there. But you also have to look at end markets. And, one of the things that we're seeing here in the U.S. is people utilizing these high efficiency, really optimal stabilizer cows, and then terminal crossing them with a breed that will create a premium on the beef side, whether that was a Wagyu or an Angus or what have you. And those are very viable production systems. And I think you would find that we're going to see more and more of that in the future because the stabilizer is so specialized and so good at being a suckler that they'll make you money in your terminal cross system.
Yeah, no, wonderful. And I think we are definitely seeing more of that actually people want an efficient cow. They want that cow to do the cow role. And if there is whatever their market, if they're selling stores and they need a specific sire line to cross to sell the stores, or the end price, whether it's an Angus or a Shorthorn or a Wagyu or whatever, to get that end market, then yeah, we're seeing more and more people doing that. And I don't think there's any problems or challenges with that, because you end up with the best of both worlds. You get the efficient suckler cow and you're getting the premium at the other end. Now, good. Now, look, I would have loved to continue talking for another, I'm sure we could keep going for another hour, but Ursula's just popped up. One final question, Ursula.
Final question. Yes, Liz and Rob Priest. They're aiming for 50% weaning weight at 200 days, but just off grass. Am I hoping for too much?
No, I would say that's definitely possible. Somewhere I've been looking at some of mine recently, and yeah, there's quite a few in the mid 45 to 55 area, just off grass. Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, and again, I would echo that. We see a number of our producers doing that. Obviously, it's management grass as well as management animals, but it is definitely possible. Good, right. So I feel we've only scratched the surface, but we can definitely review and revisit this on another occasion. So look, we've done just our half hour. We've had a cup of tea. I'm about finished. It just leaves me to thank you, Lee, and thank you, Richard, thank you, Ursula, for all being part of this. I'd like to thank everybody that's attended this evening. And if you're interested and want to know more, you can head over to our website, which is stabiliser.co.uk. All of the information we've discussed is on there, along with a whole lot more. All of our contact details. If anybody wants to get in touch with us or has got any questions that we didn't get around to this evening, please drop us an email at info@stabiliser.co.uk, and we'll get back to you. We've got another series of webinars, one a week for the next 4 weeks. Keep an eye on our social medias and on our webpage. So with that all, thank you very much for this evening. And I look forward to catching up with everybody soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.